Greetings and welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, things adjacent. And I want to talk a little bit about this article from Rolling Stone, America's Radioactive Secret. From January 21, 2020, America's radioactive secret: oil and gas wells produce nearly 1 trillion gallons of toxic waste a year. An investigation shows how it could be making workers sick and contaminating communities across America. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just kind of dip into this a little bit. In 2014, a muscular, middle-aged Ohio man named Peter took a job trucking waste for an oil and gas industry. The hours were long. He was out the door by 3 a.m. every morning and not home until well after dark. The steady $16 an hour pay was appealing, says Peter, who asked to use a pseudonym. This is a poverty area, he says, of his home in the state's rural southeast corner. Throw a little money at us and by God, we'll jump and take it. In a squat rig fitted with a 5,000-gallon tank, Peter crisscrosses the expanse of farms and woods near the Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania border, the heart of a region that produces close to one-third of America's natural gas. He hauls a salty substance called brine, a naturally occurring waste product that gushes out of America's oil and gas wells to the tune of nearly 1 trillion gallons a year, enough to flood Manhattan, almost shin high every single day. That's a lot. That's a lot. At most wells, far more brine is produced than oil or gas. As much as 10 times more. It collects in tanks, and like an oil and gas garbage man, Peter picks it up and hauls it off to the treatment plants or injection wells, where it's disposed of by being shot back into the earth. One day in 2017, Peter pulled up to an injection well in Cambridge, Ohio. A worker walked around his truck with a handheld radiation detector, he says, and told him he was carrying one of the hottest loads he'd ever seen. It was the first time Peter had heard any mention of the brine being radioactive. Whoops. The Earth's crust is in fact peppered with radioactive elements that concentrate deep underground in oil and gas-bearing layers. This radioactivity is often pulled to the surface when oil and gas is extracted, carried largely in the brine. To move on, a lot of guys are coming up with cancer or sores and skin lesions that take months to heal, he says. Peter experiences regular headaches and nausea, numbness in his fingertips and face, and joint pain like fire. That's surely the sign of something. He says he hasn't given any safety instructions on radioactivity. He wasn't. And while he is required to wear steel-toe boots, safety glasses, and a hard hat, and clothes with a flash-resistant coating, he isn't required to wear a respirator or dosimeter to measure his radioactivity exposure. Dosimeter, I guess. And the rest of the uniform hardly offers protection from brine. It's all over your hands and inside your boots and on the cuticles of your toes. And any cuts you have, you're soaked, he says. Wow. So Peter started quietly taking samples of the brine he hauled, filling up old antifreeze containers or soda bottles. Eventually, he packed a shed in his backyard with more than 40 samples. He worried about further contamination, but says for him, the damage is already done. He wanted answers. I cover my ass, he says. 10 or 15 years down the road, if I get sick, I want to be able to prove this. Through a grassroots network of Ohio activists, Peter was able to transfer 11 samples of brine to the Center for Environmental Research and Education at Duquesne University, which had them tested in a lab at the University of Pittsburgh. The results were striking. Radium, typically the most abundant radionuclide in brine, is often measured in picocuries per liter of substance, and is so dangerous it's subject to tight restrictions even at hazardous waste sites. The most common isotope are radium-226 and radium-228, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires industrial discharges to remain below 60 for each. 4 of Peter's samples registered combined radium levels above 3,500, and one was more than 8,500. Wow. It's ridiculous that these drivers are not being told what's in their trucks, says John Stolz, Duquesne's environmental center director, and this stuff is on every corner. It is in neighborhoods. Truckers don't know they're being exposed to radioactive waste, nor are they being provided with protective clothing. Peter samples are just a drop in the bucket. Oil fields across the country, from the Bakken in North Dakota to the Permian in Texas, have been found to produce brine that is highly radioactive. All oil field workers, says Fairley, are radiation workers, but they don't necessarily know it. Yeah, this is a huge problem. This radiation is also contaminating drinking water across the country. At a time when the Trump administration is deregulating environmental standards and environmental protections and, hazardous waste and work area protections, this is a time when we need to be doing more. We need more regulations, not less. I'm going to link this article below, and you guys can read it in its entirety. Moving on. One of the banes of my existence is the leaf blower. The gas-powered leaf blower is the most polluting yard tool ever invented. This is from a year ago, or more than a year ago, December 2nd, 2019. Its cousins aren't that great either. You like your yard man, he's a nice guy, but you hate his gas-powered yard tools, particularly the leaf blower. Inevitably, you're trying to take a nap while he's making Indy 500 noises. If your house has any air leaks, it fills with the noxious fumes from the exhaust. If you find that irritating, you are not alone. In 2011, a 50cc two-stroke leaf blower and a Ford F-150 Raptor with a 6.2-liter 411 horsepower engine were each run for 30 minutes, and the resultant pollutants were measured. The hydrocarbon emissions from the leaf blower were the equivalent of driving the Ford pickup 3,887 miles. For the same amount of pollution, you can go from Dallas to Anchorage with your friends or blow some paper-thin organic material around your yard. Some of the components of the two-stroke engine emissions are benzene, 1 and 3, butadiene, acetaldehyde, I don't know how to pronounce that, and formaldehyde, known carcinogens. But more troubling is the ultrafine particles measuring 0.01 microns or less. These can get in the deepest recesses of the lungs. An operator of such equipment may as well be standing by a busy highway sucking down swirling brake dust. For the user of the leaf blower, the noise can get up to 100 decibels. Ear protection is recommended past 85 decibels, but even hundreds of feet away, the noise can be in the mid-60s, a level that can trigger increases in blood pressure and heart rates. It is ruinous for kids' concentration while learning and completely destroys naps. The wind speed can approach 200 miles per hour, so it is like a small EF4 tornado in its ability to pick up particles of pollution from the ground and shove them right up your nose. Things like brake lining powder, lead, fungus spores, pathogens, pesticides, and herbicides can become airborne and a menace to health. The gas-powered leaf blower is a particularly onerous tool because of its noise and the double whammy of its emissions plus the stuff it stirs up from the ground. The gas-powered mowers, edgers, clippers, and chainsaws are not far behind as a nuisance and a hazard. You would think that there would be laws limiting their use or steering it toward electric. California, as usual, was at the forefront of this. When the California legislature tried to introduce higher standards, the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute stepped in and lobbied Senator Kit Bond of Missouri to introduce an amendment denying states the ability to pass laws stricter than the federal laws regarding small-engine off-road vehicles. Because that helps people, right? That's what senators and congressmen are supposed to be doing, is helping people by kowtowing to their corporate donors or lobbyists. It went to court, culminating in California keeping its stricter laws but allowing no other states to do that. Wow. Side observation, where's the Citizens for a Healthy Environment Institute, and why can't they wield lobby money to counter such nonsense? We as individuals can fight back. Choose a landscaper that uses electric equipment. Get an electric mower. Mulch your leaves. I'm in the process of about to be mulching my leaves. Works best on smaller yards. Better yet, get a large piece of cardboard and just scoop them up and pour them into a leaf bag. It takes less time than raking or blowing. If you have to get every leaf, do it with an electric blower. I've got one. It works great for that couple of minutes tidying up the rake job. It goes great with my electric mower, edger, hedge clipper, and chainsaw. A 50-foot long extension cord is a good investment if you go this route. The best way to fight back, however, is to exercise your right to vote. If you get the chance, vote for people willing to strengthen and properly fund our EPA and introduce legislation to protect our environment. Economic growth at any cost is too expensive. We need to start living within our means environmentally. Yes. And lastly, this video I want to cover climate change and pathogens. This is from Climate State. Some scientists think that climate change, with its increase in sudden and extreme weather events, plays a role in Ebola outbreaks. Dry seasons followed by heavy rainfalls that produce an abundance of fruit have coincided with outbreaks. When fruit is plentiful, bats, the suspected carrier of the recent Ebola outbreak, and apes may gather together to eat, providing opportunities for the disease to jump between species. Humans can contact the disease by eating or handling an infected animal. According to the United States Agency for International Development, nearly 75% of all new, emerging or re-emerging diseases affecting humans at the beginning of the 21st century are zoonotic, meaning they originate in animals. These include AIDS, SARS, H5N1, avian flu, and the H1N1 flu. More and more wild animals which may have carried diseases without effect for years are coming into contact with humans, often because of deforestation. SARS and the new virus behind the Wuhan outbreak are highly related, both belonging to a family called coronaviruses. Coronaviruses are a large family of viruses, some of which cause illness in people, while others circulate among animals, including camels, cats, and bats. Global surveys would ultimately reveal that the ancestors and relatives of SARS has been circulating in bats across Asia, Africa, and Europe. For years, bats are now considered the original source of all major coronaviruses. For one thing's certain, the next pandemic will come and may resemble the Spanish flu of 1918, which infected 500 million people. At that time, there was like 1 billion people in the world, right? Or less than 2 billion? Is that correct? I don't know. I know at the beginning of the 18th or the 20th century, or the beginning of the 1900s, however you want to call it, we were much fewer as a species. The questions are when, where, and how, and whether we'll be ready collectively. I say collectively because a pandemic like climate change doesn't respect passports or borders. We don't quarantine, cure, or save America first, or China first, or anybody first. We either put humanity first or we all lose. There are other links between climate change and pandemics, and to be clear, the current outbreak is still far from being one. The main connection is that global warming actually creates new disease vectors. As the permafrost thaws in places like Siberia, viruses that have been frozen for millennia and against which animals and humans no longer have any resistance will resurface. And as desertification and other side effects of warming move the boundaries between habitats, species will come into contact with creatures they've never encountered before. That's how viruses start their journey. Rachel Kyle, the World Bank's vice president for sustainable development, told The Independent, "We expect to see more outbreaks of unknown pathogens, disease-causing microorganisms as temperatures and weather patterns change. Not just new pathogens. There are many agents connected to climate warming which could pose a threat, weaken organisms' immune systems, lowering the potential to withstand disease. One of such is mercury. It accumulated in past decades in frozen soils. Now induced thaw could once again mobilize it and end up in our food chain." Related to human health are also artificially created forever chemicals. With immunotoxicity, The Guardian noted this week, U.S. drinking water contamination with forever chemicals, which I'm going to cover in another video, far worse than scientists thought. And this forever chemical is carcinogenic, again, reducing organisms' odds of surviving a pathogen exposure. The takeaway here is that new disease vectors could occur more frequently in a warming world. Currently, we see the novel Wuhan Coronavirus emerge, as well as a possible rise in incidence of increased overall background exposure to pathogens. The result means more frequent interruptions for societies, our collective ability to function properly. During a time when people need to learn and stem climate actions and to plan and implement forced adaptations. Vector-borne diseases, climate nexus, climate risk, and spread of vector-borne diseases. They cover this: Lyme disease, West Nile virus, etc. Rising global temperatures can lengthen the season and increase the geographic range of disease-carrying insects. As temperatures warm, mosquitoes and other warm weather vectors can move into higher altitudes and new regions farther from the equator. For instance, in some regions in the United States, warming is lengthening the season for Zika-carrying mosquitoes. Increased rainfall, flooding, and humidity creates more viable areas for vector breeding and allows breeding to occur more quickly as eggs hatch faster in hotter climates. For example, officials braced for an increase in the risk for Zika and West Nile virus infections after the massive flooding event in Louisiana in August 2016, which increased the breeding habitats for the Aedes mosquitoes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Aedes or Aedes. Human migration exposes people to viruses to which they are not immune. As populations migrate in response to viruses, which in response to climate change, they bring disease to new regions and urban areas. Infectious diseases spread more quickly in overcrowded urban areas. Okay. Yes. The conditions that climate change create around the world create excellent breeding grounds or situations where diseases can spread, and that is only going to increase as climate change, the effects of climate change also increases. That's all I have for you today in this video. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.